Hi gang, it's me, Robert J. Simpson here once again. Thank you very much for stopping by. As I record this one today, it's the 15th of April 2020, and that means today marks the 108th anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic, perhaps the most famous ship to ever sail the ocean, largely as a result of the loss of life on it. There were about 2,200 people on board, 1,500 of which perished in the disaster itself. It has become a shorthand for all kinds of disasters and scale, and basically the idea of man's seeming inability to recognise his own feelings. Now, as someone from Belfast, it's hard not to be in some way interested in Titanic. Growing up as a kid, I'm from East Belfast, and growing up, it was something that was sort of talked about quite a lot still. I am just about old enough to remember them actually discovering the Titanic back in 1985. And then there was a documentary came on Channel 4, I think in 86. And I was a kid, I was only 5 years old at the time. But there was something about that story at the time that captivated me, and I remember watching the footage of Robert Ballard exploring the ship and these sort of grainy black and white images of the crow's nest, and just being absolutely fascinated. And as a kid, the only thing I ever wanted to do was to study archaeology. I wanted to dig up dinosaur bones and go treasure hunting, and Titanic and exploring the ocean was a huge part of that. So it is one of those things that sort of has cemented itself, and over the years, I've kind of drifted in and out of love with the story of the ship itself. I'm not an engineer in any way, shape, or form. I find a lot of the technological aspects of it just go completely over my head. But the stories of the individuals themselves, I find absolutely fascinating. And those of you who follow me on my Instagram or my Facebook will know that every now and then I'd pick up on another little story, and I've gone off hunting for locations and places where people lived, just to try and tell some of that story and to relive a bit of it as well. So I'm going to talk in the next vlog as well about another Titanic-y thing, but one of the other aspects of the various things that I'm interested in is genealogy. I've always loved the idea of finding out stories about people, and over the last decade I've got really involved in sort of working out our own family history. For me, I always look at it as a great big jigsaw puzzle. Lots and lots of information, just trying to put together the little bits and pieces as best you can. That's often a big challenge. It's a really, really good workout for the brain. So I've been doing that for years and years, and there's a couple of connections that I have with Titanic as well, and I'm just going to briefly talk about those. So the first one I knew ever since I was a kid. My mum first told me the story, must have been when I was at primary school. And according to her, her great-grandfather, a man called Joseph McMenemy, was meant to travel on the Titanic as a steward. That was the job that he was doing for the ships at the time. Somehow he managed to miss the boat. And fortunately he survived. But in 1939, during a blackout in Liverpool, he missed the footing between the dockside and the ship itself, and he was drowned. Now, it's a pretty good story. I've always liked the sort of the macabre elements of it. I checked with my grandmother as well, and my gran told me that she was told the story by her mother, whose father would have been, and so there was no reason ever to doubt the story from that sense. Now, there are records that exist for some of the people who missed the boat when it comes to Titanic. There are people who basically didn't take up their service, people who didn't use their tickets and things. I've never been able to find any confirmation through the records of Joseph McMenemy's story, although I think he did work at some stage for the White Star Line, and certainly some of his other relatives did. So it may well have been true, but it's also worth bearing in mind that Titanic was probably due to do a second and a third runs as well, and he may have been signed up provisionally to do one of those trips, but then didn't get the chance, or he may have been looking at the Olympic, the sister ship. It's very, very hard to tell. Not everything we have records for, but nevertheless, it's a good story. I was always a little bit sceptical about the other part of that as well, because look, as a historian, I have known all along to always ask questions about the things that you read, because it's not always true. And eventually I uncovered a couple of newspaper articles from 1939 detailing the inquest into his death. And indeed it does appear that he was out, I think it was October 14th, 1939, had gone into Liverpool on his first night and had missed the footing on the way back and was found in the water the next day, standing upright. So sadly he died, and his body was eventually brought back to Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland, where he is now buried, originally from Glasgow. So a couple of years ago I was over in Liverpool with my friend David Kernick. Some of you might know him as the writer David L. Radigan, and David and I, one thing I wanted to do while I was in Liverpool was to go down to the dock in Liverpool and actually sort of stand at the spot where he perished, and that's what I did. So yeah, and I've also been to the street where he was born. Like, I love kind of actually living and walking the spaces that were used by these people. I think it's really important to do that, to get an understanding of them and their world. Now, the other connection that I've subsequently found out is that on Titanic there was, in fact, one Simpson on board. There was a man called John Edward Simpson, and that was the ship's assistant surgeon. Now, there's a couple of strange coincidences. One is that, well, we actually share a name. I'm Robert John Edward Simpson, which some of you know, so we share a name, even though that's completely coincidental. And I'm now slightly older than he was whenever he was on board. But his family was from Cullybackey in County Antrim. So it turns out that, as best as I can work out at the moment, I'm still sort of researching some of the genealogy because there's a couple of little gaps, but he would be a distant relative, something like a 6th or 7th cousin. There's probably one generation in the tree I'm still trying to piece together, and the DNA tests that I've done certainly haven't worked it out yet, but I haven't got enough of our Simpson line tested to see if there's a connection. But yeah, no, so my family's from Portland and Masharkin are Simpsons, so basically the next village over, and at that time, the early 1800s, basically all the Simpsons in that area were related, so he has some sort of connection. So yeah, so it's quite nice to have those couple of tangible connections to the ship itself. It means the story has always meant possibly a little bit more to me. Yeah, and I do a bit of work now around Titanic, have done for years. There's a book up here which has a Titanic connection that I was involved in publishing in 2012, and I'll talk about that on tomorrow's. But yeah, so today's 108 years of the Titanic disaster. Something that's always worth bearing in mind, and it's something that absorbs quite a bit of my time every year. Got to be honest, I have, as you can see, shelves full of books and films all related to the ship, and I've I'm always buying more. There's always something else left to learn, even though this is an ancient tragedy now. Yeah, but if you've never looked into the story, it's well worth checking out some of the films. There are stories for everybody from all walks of life, regardless of your name, your gender, nationality, occupations, marital shenanigans, etc., etc. There is something there for everyone, between those 2,200 people on board and the 3,500 people that built the ship to begin with. There's bound to be something. Look, that's me for today. It's enough whittering on from me. I will chat to you again, hopefully tomorrow. Bye bye.